Tonight on Bridge City News, China escalates its action against 2 detained Canadians. Ontario's police watchdog is investigating a horrific car crash that killed a mother and her 3 daughters. You might still be socially distancing, but you can still celebrate Dad with this delicious takeout 3-course meal.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm Loris Alexander. Thank you for joining us. Canada's already dismal relationship with China has hit a new low. 2 Canadians already long detained have now been charged as spies. Michael Spavarov and Michael Kovrig have both been held by China for 18 months. Both were detained shortly after Canada arrested powerful Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou at the request of the United States. When asked what his government would do to secure the release of these Canadian nationals, Trudeau said Canada would continue to work behind the scenes in very direct and firm ways.
We are, of course, disappointed with the decision and the next step taken by the Chinese in the case of the 2 Michaels, and we offer all our support and sympathies to the families of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavar, who are obviously living a difficult moment today, as they have been for well over a year with the arbitrary detention of 2 Canadian citizens. In the case of the 2 Michaels, I can say that we are using a wide range of public and private measures to ensure that everything is being done to get these Michaels home.
A mother and her 3 daughters killed in a horrific collision Thursday afternoon in Brampton, Ontario, have been identified as Carolina Casulo and her children Clara, Liliana, and Mila. A local resident, Sandeep Singh, jumped into action. Dramatic video posted to Facebook shows a blue Infiniti rolling through the intersection of Dougal Avenue and Kennedy Road North in the Strawberry Fields neighborhood of Caledon. An Alberta emergency alert was issued Saturday morning that stated there was a significant gas leak following an incident in downtown Black Diamond. It said the downtown area was close to traffic and that nearby businesses and residents were being evacuated. An update has been posted on the town's website saying the leak has been contained and further repairs are ongoing. Today is World Refugee Day, a day that spotlights the bravery and strength of people forced to flee their home countries to escape war or oppression. According to the UN, which established World Refugee Day in 2000, more than 70 million people are now forcibly displaced worldwide. BCN was at the Lethbridge Farmers Market today and spoke with a family-owned and operated homemade pierogies business. They tell us how COVID-19 has affected their sales and why it's important to support local.
I started my business about 6-7 years ago. My friend asked me to cook her some pierogies, and she really liked them, and she says, why don't you make more? I can sell them, or we can sell them, and that's how it started. We're not doing as many events and markets as we were before. The 1st of July is canceled, other festivities are also canceled, so we only rely on the Lethbridge market. All our clients are not back yet, so we are waiting for them and anxious to serve them our pierogies. So we do hand pinch our pierogi, and all our ingredients are locally bought if possible, and there are no preservative or artificial flavoring in them. We try to make it, as we do it, for our family. So everything is, good and fresh. We had to put a screen in front of our booth so the food is protected and the clients and us are protected as well. We don't have seating for the clients, so if we serve pierogi, it has to be takeout only. And also we have to sanitize, our surface and wear gloves. We got to know our clients personally, so most of them come here every week for for our hot pierogis and frozen pierogis. We don't have, we can't serve samples, which is also a minus because until you try our pierogi, you don't know what you're missing. Before we started market, we were doing online orders. We delivered the pierogi to clients' home. That was okay, but we need more business.
Although more activities have reopened in the Lethbridge area, Father's Day, which is tomorrow, still isn't a straightforward celebration as it was in pre-pandemic times. Clearly sensing that, one local catering company is whipping up a special 3-course meal to help celebrate Dad.
We decided to come up with a Father's Day menu because fathers are specials too, and they work really hard, and we've been going through a really rough time as a community. So we thought it was really nice to do something special for Father's Day too. They deserve it. My husband being a chef, coming from New York and having the background of Latin, so we try to give it a little bit of a kick when it comes to spices. So when we say carne asada, it's not just a simple carne asada. We like to use spices as if we are at home. So for all those fathers out there that have been to Latin America and they like the carne asada, and that's what you're getting in that menu. Also with the salmon, we like to implement and add extra spices.
I'm gonna be showing you real quick a sampling of the grilled salmon that we have it for tomorrow, Father's Day. And I do have another sampling too from the ceviche. We're gonna start with the ceviche. So here we are. This is exactly the amount that you're gonna be getting. So if you wanna basically move it into a fancy glass, if you do have it, it's totally up to you. Or you can just eat it out of this container. But I just wanna show you real quick how fancy you can turn it. So as you can see, it's exactly the whole amount that it goes in there. It's 12 ounces of pure lime juice. There you get some tomatoes. Of course, you get 7 pieces of jumbo shrimp. And you guys know too, we carry our own plantain chips. Wedge of lime in there. It should stay there because it looks like a nice cocktail right there. Okay, so then one thing that we usually give you as a sampling, it is a side of chilero. It is a pickled jalapeno that it comes with carrots, onions, serrano peppers, and a little bit butter and lime. Voila! There you go, guys. It's dinner time by Carol's Catering.
Recapping one of our top news stories, Canada's already dismal relationship with China has hit a new low. 2 Canadians already long detained have now been charged as spies. Michael Spavarov and Michael Kovrig have been held by China for 18 months. Both were detained shortly after Canada arrested powerful Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou at the request of the United States. And a look at weekend weather. Tonight, partly cloudy with a 60% chance of showers and a risk of a thunderstorm early this evening, and a low of 13. On Father's Day, we are looking at a mix of sun and cloud. Unfortunately, 30% chance of showers in the afternoon with risk of a thunderstorm and a low of 10. Family caregivers are usually relatives, neighbors, friends, or close acquaintances who undertake a challenging role but aren't necessarily paid for it. Most people are family caregivers at some point in their lives. Someone might have aged parents, others might have disabled children or spouses having gone through an accident. Whatever the reason, caregivers are beyond a doubt some of the selfless people you'll ever see. BCN's Jeanette Rocher spoke with one exceptional man about his own personal experience. That interview is up next.
Caregivers are an essential part of everyday living for millions of Canadians. It's an intense, high-stress job with many rewarding moments. Today's guest has personal experience in this area, and he's cared for his beautiful wife, Gracie, who lives with severe disabilities for 33 plus years. He is the host of the weekly radio show, Hope for the Caregiver, president of Standing with Hope, and author of the book, Hope for the Caregiver. Peter Rosenberger, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you on today.
It is a treat to be with you all.
So, Peter, tell us how many people are caregivers in the United States? And I believe you have statistics on Canada as well.
Well, it's a hard number to actually quantify because a lot of times they talk about caregivers for those who are caring for the aging, senior citizens and so forth, and that's about a 42 million number in America. But then you throw in special needs children, then you throw in mentally ill, then you throw in what I do on my show and what I talk about, alcoholics and addicts. That alcoholism and addiction is a chronic impairment. Even if you're in recovery, you're still dealing with that impairment. And anybody's that's in the orbit of that individual, they know that individual is chronically impaired. And that wherever you find somebody who's chronically impaired, you're going to find a caregiver. So most experts in the United States are hovering around that 65 million range for the family caregiver in the United States. And in Canada, it's 8 to 11 million. Again, it's hard to quantify that number because a lot of people don't identify as such. They don't think of themselves as a caregiver. I did a whole bit a couple of years ago with comedian Jeff Foxworthy on "You Might Be a Caregiver If."
Wow.
And if you've ever hooked up your wife's wheelchair to your dog just to see if it would work, you're probably a caregiver. I mean, that's, I was trying to do something that would kind of make people think of a little bit different about that. And it's okay to laugh at that, by the way. That's funny. And,
Right.
if you get more than 6 Christmas cards from a doctor, you're probably a caregiver, And so people don't think of themselves as such. And I'm helping reframe that conversation so people understand, why is this important? What am I doing here? Where's this going? And how do I do it better or safer?
Yeah. Now, you are a caregiver yourself. Let's talk about how you became one and what has the journey been like for you?
Well, I became one when I said I do, and then I did, because my wife was hurt several years before I even met her. She had a really bad car wreck when she was a teenager, 17 years old. She had the world by the tail. And she was at school, at a music school in Nashville, Tennessee. I was at a different school in South Carolina at the time. Didn't know her. I transferred in as she was recuperating out of after the wreck. She came back, and friends said, "You got to meet this girl." And they said she's had a really bad wreck, but you guys are going to really hit it off. And she's the most spunky girl. You talked to her yesterday. She's got a personality as big as the state we live in, which is Montana, and beautiful, beautiful young gal. I mean, when I saw her, I was, don't take my word for it, Google her. I was Googling her that day. We didn't even have Google back then. and then I heard her sing, and I was a pianist. She's a singer, and it was all over at that point, and I knew I was going to take care of her. She had a limp. I saw some scars on her lower legs at first, and I knew that she'd had some tough times, but had no concept of what this meant. She'd had about 20 surgeries by the time I met her in the mid 80s. We got married, and the doctor said, look, if you guys are going to have kids, you have them when you're young. And so I went to her and I said, baby, doctor says we got to do this. And I got a prescription and everything. And I don't know if that's covered under Obamacare, but I bet you that's covered under Clinton care. So we had 2 children, but it accelerated some of that's funny, by the way. Y'all could laugh at that. That is just really funny. And y'all should laugh harder. But we had our sons, and after each son, she gave up one of her legs. It just accelerated the damage that was going on with her crushed limbs. The surgeries just kept mounting. To date that I could count, she's had 80 that I can count, and about another 150 smaller procedures. She's been treated by over 100 doctors in 12 different hospitals, and the bill is now well over 11 million. It just keeps growing. It's really kind of hard to keep track of all of it. I'm ballparking on that one, and that's a low ballpark. So she lives with severe pain all the time, and not known a day without it since Reagan was president in his first term. So that's a long time to deal with disability and challenges and heartache and frustration. And I've come to understand where the real battle is for the family caregiver. And and this is why I wrote the book. This is why I did the show. This is why I'm here with you today, because I understand how dark and discouraging those places can be when you're having a late night conversation with the ceiling fan, thinking, "Oh Lord, what am I going to do?" And so that's my story.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what you two have been through, and I can see that you use humor a lot, which is great. It's a great coping
Well, I like
mechanism.
to call it humor.
Yeah.
From your reaction, I was unclear if it was humor, but some things
sorry.
don't translate to Canada. I don't know. I don't know what that's all about.
Don't worry about it. Everyone will get it. Okay, so obviously you've got a lot of experience in this. What kind of advice can you give to those who might recognize that they could eventually become a caregiver, possibly to like aging parents? Is there anything that they can do to plan for it?
Yes. First off, if you love somebody, you will probably be a caregiver. If you live long enough, you're probably going to need one. So we all got a stake in this. It's a slow, creeping reality that we don't think about because we're always so busy right here in the here and now. But there's several things you can do to prepare for this. One of them is make sure your home is ready. When you're 50, 60 years old, don't go buy a 3-story home with a whole lot of stairs and the living part is way up on top. Don't do that. That's not a good idea. Make sure that you've got wider doorways, handicap accessible things. We're all one sprained ankle away from being in a tough situation in our own home. So let's go ahead and plan for that. Another thing is we've got to start taking care of ourselves and being good stewards, planning financially, planning physically with our bodies and things such as that, because it is coming. And then if you have a special needs child that comes in, all of a sudden you've brought this child into the world, there are things to prepare for that once that reality hits of what you can do. And but it all starts with the heart. And my message is for caregivers: healthy caregivers make better caregivers. And if you're morbidly obese, how is that going to help you take care of someone else? I see too many people who are really heavy pushing wheelchairs. And I know it. I wrote a book called 7 Caregiver Landmines. Excessive weight gain is one of those. I know. I got so big it took 2 dogs to bark at me. I know. I get it. We reach for the comfort food. That was funny, by the way, too. And I got a million of those. I got so big I broke my family tree. I mean, I got big. And I understand that, but we've got to dial that back in. But the heavy weight that we really carry is not around our waist, it's around our heart. And so what I do is try to speak to that heart of the caregiver to let them know, number one, if you're in this situation right now, which there are millions of people in Canada dealing with this right now, you're in this situation now, hey, you know what? You didn't cause it, you can't cure it.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. That's not yours to fix. You're a steward of this. Now, we don't talk about stewardship a lot in our society. I don't know what you guys do up there in Canada, but in America, we're $24 trillion in debt. Stewardship is clearly not on the top of mind of everybody in America. And we got people burning down our cities and everything else. Stewardship is not where our headspace is. But for caregivers, that's where it has to be. It really has to be for all of us, but I'm just going to focus on caregivers. We are stewards of somebody who is suffering or impaired or struggling. We are not owners or fixers. That's the big thing to keep in mind. You can't fix these things. I don't have any power over amputation. My wife's lost both legs, and her body is orthopedically a train wreck. I have no power over that, but I have a lot of power over being a jerk.
Absolutely. That's right.
I got a lot of power over that. And so that's where the battle is for us as caregivers. Can we live peacefully with things that we don't particularly like?
Right. Now, in your book, you use 3 positive words for high stress moments. They are wait, water, and walk. What do you mean by that?
Well, I never have to make amends for something I didn't say. And sometimes we are so quick to blurt out some stuff and we want to jump into it. And for us as caregivers, we're often required to learn to bite our tongue and enjoy the taste of blood, because we want to pop off and say things. Just wait. just breathe. Just take a deep breath, 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out, and calm yourself down. If that's not enough, drink some water. A lot of times we reach for sodas or high sugary drinks or whatever. Please, for all that is good in this world, avoid drinking things like Red Bull as a caregiver. It is not good for you. And we don't need to be so amped up. Our life is like this anyway. So drink some water, drink to think. We need to hydrate, and water gives us a chance to get our blood pressure down. Also, it fills our mouth with something besides words. We don't always have to go to every fight we get a ticket to. They're going to say things that are, or family members are going to say things, or doctors or nurses, or somebody's going to say, pastors, church people come up to you. Well, if you had enough faith, you wouldn't be going through this. Well, they don't say that to me anymore. I'm a second-degree black belt, so I usually know how to deal with that kind of nonsense. And I'm helping help people get better theology in this too, because we got really terrible theology when it comes to suffering. But drink, okay? Just drinks. Not. Let me clarify. Drink water. Don't just clarify that.
Don't drink red wine, is what you're saying.
And the last thing is go for a walk if you need to. Weight, water, walk. You don't have to engage on all these things. It's okay to let some of this go.
That's interesting. It's good advice, too. Now, in your book, you also mentioned that there are 6 major impact areas affected by caregiving. What are they?
Well, you got your health, your emotions, your lifestyle, your profession, your money, and your endurance. You put it all together, it says, help me. And that's the cry for us as caregivers. All of these things are affected, but it starts with your heart. If your head and heart are squirrely, guess what? Your wallet will soon follow. If you are a train wreck in your darkest places in your heart, guess what? Your body will soon be that way too. It's just, and so if you can detangle this stuff in the heart, then we give every part of our living existence a fighting chance in dealing with these realities. So that's where I focus, but it's always about help me, not help us, not help her, help me. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm in a good place, my wife, who has all these things going on with her, has a fair shot at having some things help with her. But if I'm in a bad place, what's going to happen to her?
Yeah, it's almost like the caregiver needs a caregiver sometimes, right? It sounds like such a hard job.
I don't give a lot of instruction to my fellow caregivers on the air or anywhere else. What I try to give is reminders, because I think that's where our battle is. You can't tell me how to take care of my wife. I can't tell you how to take care of your family member, but we can remind each other of where safety is. In the Army, sometimes the leader is the guy that remembers where the Jeep is parked, you know? And we can remind each other of where safety is. Have you seen your doctor lately? Have you been to a counselor lately? When's the last time that you went for a walk?
Right. And that's good advice for the caregivers. You also mentioned that there are 3 I's that every caregiver suffers from. What are they?
Every one of us lose their independence, we become isolated, and then we lose our identity. And that loss of identity is such a debilitating thing for family caregivers. Ask a caregiver, how are you doing? They say, well, she had a bad night, or I'm not doing, she had a bad night, or he's had a bad night, or we're not doing so well. They struggle with saying I. And so what I do on my show, when I have a caller that calls, it's a live show, and I always ask, how are you feeling? And it's amazing how many times they have to start and reposition again to be able to go back and say, I'm tired, I'm scared, I'm just hacked off. I don't know what to do. I don't care what comes after the word I. We can have a real conversation at that point, because then they start speaking, and they're probably stuttering, and tears will fill up their eyes. I've seen this over and over and over when they start speaking from their heart. But I try to give them enough space to be able to do that so that they can express what's going on there, get it all on the table. Now let's have a real conversation.
Oh, that's so interesting. And you're absolutely right. You do lose your identity, and you start to take on, almost project your personality onto the other person, or they get projected back onto you. That is so interesting. And it really drives home the fact of how much caregivers need other people in their lives too, right? Like counseling, and I would imagine they suffer from guilt a lot of times, and worry, and just all kinds of stresses.
Guilt really, really cripples caregivers.
Yeah.
I call it part of the fog of caregivers: fear, obligation, and guilt. And we get lost in the fog.
Yeah.
Parents feel guilty for bringing a child into this world with special needs. You feel guilty if your loved one can't get up and go and just stand up and take a shower. You feel guilty if you can get up and go and walk around the block and they can't. There are a lot of things to feel, not just sins that get great press. There are a lot of things to feel guilty about. You feel guilty if you just want to sit down and watch a television show uninterrupted for an hour.
Wow.
I try to help caregivers work through that a little bit and start using the word grace. I love that word grace. It's my favorite word in the English language. I married a woman named Grace, and I love the word grace. And we've got to learn how to apply that in our own lives so that we can live peacefully with very, very painful things.
Well, Peter Rosenberger, we are out of time. Unfortunately, I would love to go on talking to you for hours and hours, and I'm sure you have so much to say on this topic. Thank you so much for joining us today, though.
Thank y'all for having me. I mean, I hope my Southern accent translates over to the North. But thank you. You'll probably use subtitles, but thanks for having me.
Not at all. Thank you so much. That was Peter Rosenberger, president of Standing with Hope and the author of the book, Hope for the Caregiver. After months of COVID-19 restrictions causing a full economic shutdown of our country and others worldwide, what will be the result? Our guest today is the Director of Econ Americas and a research associate for the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Fergus Hodgson joins us today from Houston, Texas. Welcome to the show, Fergus. Great to have you on today.
Thank you, Jeanette. It's my privilege to be with you.
Excellent. Now, Fergus, there's been some debate over the past few months on whether or not it's been a good idea to shut down the economy during this COVID pandemic. Health experts, of course, are saying it's more than necessary for the good of public health, while perhaps some business owners or even economists think that it's not such a great idea. Where do you sit on this debate?
Sure. It's a really difficult question, but the first maybe angle to address is what are we considering here? The problem is that we're dealing with health professionals and politicians who are basically looking to mitigate all risk, all casualties, right? And economists, we think in terms of trade-offs. We know that there can be some deaths caused by the virus. There can also be deaths brought about by a shutdown of the economy, because we know that a poorer economy brings suicides, it brings lower wages or salaries, and that brings shorter lifespans, broken marriages, whatever it may be. There are all these secondary factors, so we seek to bring a balance. And the truth is, it's very hard to know in such with such limited information initially how to make that trade-off. The truth is, though, now the information is in, and we know that only a small proportion of the society is vulnerable to this, and therefore the lockdown should be removed immediately, or should have been removed earlier than it has been. It's gone on far too long. I'm here in Texas, and people are basically back to regular life.
Oh, wow. Wow. In short order, too. I know things are starting to open up here as well. Now, do you think that governments worldwide overreacted to the threat of COVID-19 by shutting down their economies?
Immensely so, and it not just by shutting down the economies, but in Canada's case, the spending has been just outrageous. So there's a new report out from a sister think tank to the Frontier Center, which I work for, and they have shown that basically the spending right now from Ottawa, so just the federal level, not considering all the provincial and local governments, is 50% greater than it was during the past recession, and 47% greater than it was simply last year. So we are in uncharted territory in terms of spending. This is greater than ever recorded in Canadian history. And it is already prior to the recession, I wrote an article about why bankruptcies were spiking in Canada, because already Canadians were suffering under too heavy taxes, under debt loads they could not pay. And now we've just added a whole layer of enormous indebtedness to the Canadian public. And in terms of irresponsible spending, just 1 month ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised $850 million in aid to foreign nations at this time, as though Canada can afford this. It's outrageous. That really Canada cannot. She's in dire straits. And so we have a combination of both economic lockdown and then outrageous spending, as though that's going to fix the initial problem. The initial problem is the lockdown. We need to remove that, and we can get on with our lives.
And Fergus, here in Canada, due to responses to the recession and COVID-19, per person federal program spending will reach an estimated $13,226. So this is a national record, but not necessarily in a good way.
No, and if you think about it, let's say only half of Canadians actually are taxpayers, right? Other people are children or retired or students, whatever it may be. And so each person shouldering, let's say about $25,000 per year is a huge burden. That's why the tax day gets pushed out further and further each year. A larger proportion of the year is devoted to collecting taxes. And the truth is, when you burden the population with higher and higher taxes, it's the compliance that comes with it. Canada has a far too complicated and burdensome compliance process for taxation. And so we are basically guaranteeing an economically stalled nation for a generation to come. And I can just say this too. I'm a Canadian citizen living in Houston, Texas. What incentive does it give to people like me to make a home in Canada? It really is saying you can look forward to this. And so it's just frustrating, to be frank, because many of us have this desire. We have family there. We would like to make a home, and we feel as though petty games now or irresponsibility now is condemning the future.
Mm-hmm. What kind of, like, what do you think spending like this could do to Canada?
Well, there's a great deal of evidence to show that once indebtedness reaches 100% of GDP, it stifles economic growth. And so the prosperity that Canadians have enjoyed for a century or more will become less and less. So the advantage over the nations we're giving aid to will be less and less, such that the idea of us giving aid to them becomes an irony. And so largely, we just find Canada becoming less competitive relative to other nations such as Australia, the United States, where I'm from, New Zealand. And so you will see, which is somewhat of a strange thing, but you will see a hollowing out of the country, that more people will come south to the United States. I go to business school here in Houston, and we have many Canadian students who come down because they say, but lower taxes, much better salaries, lower cost of living. It makes sense. And I don't want that to happen I don't want this trend to get even worse, right? So right now, the disparity from only last year, which was supposed to be a record already, is enormous. So you can take your pick, whether it's sending money to fund abortions abroad or giving money to international students in Canada. This spending is totally unnecessary. It has nothing to do with fixing the coronavirus. And so we're dealing with basically a self-made crisis. The lockdown and the irresponsible spending are far worse than the actual coronavirus.
So in your opinion, is this irresponsible spending, or is it something that the country had no choice in doing?
Well, that's a tough question. I do think it is irresponsible, but you can understand the argument from those people who have been shut down to say, well, if you're going to stop us from doing any business, how can we pay our bills, right? So in some ways, they're breaking your leg and then handing you a crutch, right? So you've been hurt and then helped to get by. In terms of irresponsibility, at this point, with the evidence in, it's becoming more and more irresponsible, and it shows the priorities of those in Ottawa to expand their control, their reach, and even their surveillance apparatus. To be frank, I've written also for the Frontier Centre about how right now you see there are 5 signs that the surveillance state in Canada is at a record level, that the tracking and monitoring of us is just far beyond what has been known previously.
Wow. Well, you had mentioned earlier of foreign aid that Canada does send a lot of money overseas to different countries for foreign aid, specifically in this COVID-19 pandemic. Do you want to discuss that a little bit? I believe that you wrote an article in the Epoch Times about that.
Yeah, so the problem is that people take foreign aid at face value, that it's somehow there to help foreign nations, yet that's simply not the case. There's strong research now that's been building up for years showing that the vast majority of that money goes to either corrupt rulers in third world nations or to cronies within our own government or contractors working with them, NGOs. And so the real motivations are basically, maybe parasitism is too strong, but big crony enjoyment, so people enjoying taxpayer funds for their own wishes, and then politicians using it as a way to buy clout. And in this case, Canada is making there's not even veiled attempt to get a UN Security Council seat, and she is buying that support from other countries. And the tragic thing about this is that you're only buying fair weather friends. Right? You're not getting ideological support. You're trying to get a seat on the UN Security Council, which I don't even know why we want, and spending taxpayer money for that. So the latest is big money going to Venezuela. I can guarantee you that money will be wasted. It's going to a socialist regime, and they are outbidding, I think it's Norway and Ireland, to try and get the Security Council seat. Let them have it. They can have that seat, and we don't need to outbid them on foreign aid spending. Wow,
so you're saying there's a vested interest there?
Yeah, it's not really hidden. I mean, basically, I can't remember when the actual vote is coming up. It's very soon, but it's well known that right now Trudeau and I guess the Liberal Party would like to have that Security Council seat as a way to say that we are world leaders or we're so influential. And the truth is that that Security Council includes many nations that are not, I mean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, or they've got Caribbean nations, they've got small nations. I can't remember right now, but not influential nations are on the Security Council. So I don't know why we really are so concerned about that. There are also nations which really are contrary to human rights. China has a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. So it's not, in my mind, it's no marker of prestige.
Interesting. Now, in a National Post commentary by 4 infectious disease doctors, they discussed their study, which showed in Canada the individual rate of death from COVID-19 for people under 65 is 0.0006%. So this is what, the equivalent risk of dying in a vehicle accident? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we all get in cars almost every day, and we don't even think about it. So that's why when people still want to wear these masks, I can't even go back to Canada to visit my family right now. Right, I've got family in Quebec, and there's a block on non-essential travel crossing the border. This is insane. We are going to such great lengths and hurting ourselves for no good reason. And it just is mass hysteria, to be frank. It's really, maybe at the outset when we had so little information we didn't know, fine, okay, people made rash decisions. But we've had 2 months of experience with this now. We know with the situation, we know it is such a low risk for people who are not immunocompromised. So yes, the risk is so low that it's very hard to justify at this point. And it just shows too, this is where I'm so glad that you let me speak, and I'm glad to work with your network, that you're letting alternative voices be heard, because so much media is fear driven. And so they want to pile up these casualty rates or death counts or whatever. And we know that data is very difficult to scrutinize, to confirm. So I'm glad that gradually alternative media, in particular, in the National Post you mentioned, have been giving another perspective here and showing that the risk is so low, it's been blown totally out of proportion.
Wow. Now, Fergus, during this time of COVID-19, there have been unprecedented stimulus packages constantly rolling out, both in the States and Canada, of course. In the States, it's costing the U.S. $2.2 trillion, surpassing the amount of $24 trillion, right, in the national debt?
Well, no. Basically, there's no hope of ever paying the national debt off in the United States. And I just heard that the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve is now $7 trillion, and I think it went up to three or 4 trillion in just the last couple of months. So the expansion is unprecedented. And the reason why this is actually going to lead to inflationary pressure is the way that not only are they printing money digitally, they have constrained the economy. At least in the US, it's less constrained now. But when you both constrain economic activity and inflate the currency, naturally you will generate inflation. And so both in Canada and the United States, the real interest rates now are below zero. So in the US, it's at zero. In Canada, I think 0.75%, the retail rate. And so you are looking, basically we're building a new bubble to create a new financial crisis in the future by all this easy credit, rather than basically tightening our belts and showing a little bit of common sense that actually when there's less economic activity, we should be spending less, not more. and we should be opening the economy as swiftly as possible to allow people to be productive. Because if we all stay at home, it's just common sense that if we all stay at home and don't go to work, who's going to produce anything? It's ridiculous. So I just it can be painful for me to talk about, really, because just like you, I care about Canada's future, and I just see us being our own worst enemies.
You're saying it true. Maybe explain how inflation, because you talked about inflation, explain how inflation is a hidden tax. How is the cost of inflation,
right.
how is that determined?
Well, sadly, it is a tax on some people more than on others. So the point is that people who are on fixed income, so if you've set a contract for a year and there's inflation, if prices are rising, if the currency is devaluing, you're getting paid less. But if you are an owner of assets, shares, or other, let's say utilities, your incomes can rise, right? They can be buffered by inflation. So it's basically a tax on the working class, the people who hold cash and earn set amounts. Obviously, anyone who's holding cash, you're being fleeced right now. And that's why it's such an irony that progressives will often promote modern monetary theory or greater spending through money creation, because it's really fleecing the most vulnerable among us who don't have the capacity to offset that inflation, who don't have the capacity to buy non-dollar denominated assets. So anyone who's earning in a set currency amount or holding set currency, you are being taxed through inflation. And your purchasing power is going down in an unequal manner. So it's basically a regressive tax on Canadians.
Wow, a burden. Fergus, we are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your time with us. It's great to have you on the show.
Jeanette, I'm proud to be with you. All the best for your channel. Cheers.
China is battling damage control to its reputation in light of the coronavirus pandemic, the trade sanctions on Canada, and the crackdown on Hong Kong protesters. Joining me now is a professor from Edmonton who knows a thing or two about the Asian nation. Gordon Holden is the director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. Welcome to BCN, Dr. Holden.
Thank you, Hal.
Now, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney tweeted that he was shocked to learn that China had arrested Martin Lee, founder of the Hong Kong Democratic Party, who's a personal friend of his. Chinese authorities also returned the tweet, rebuking Kenney and basically telling him to stay out of China's affairs. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it was a mistake to arrest Martin Lee. This is a legend of promotion of democracy in Hong Kong. I've known him for 25 years. I called on him last November when I was in Hong Kong. He's a remarkable gentleman. He speaks English with a British accent. He did his law studies in Britain. He battled the British for greater democracy in China, and now has been battling the Chinese since 1997. They picked the wrong target, absolutely.
Now, while the world grapples with COVID-19, it seems that China has used this opportunity to arrest pro-democracy leaders in Hong Kong. Why does China fear the one country, two systems agreement?
Well, I think that there was always ambivalence in China about the one country, two systems. I think that Deng Xiaoping, when he was around, was willing to make that concession because he knew that China really badly needed Hong Kong, its financial clout, its technology, its ability to promote business within China itself. It needs Hong Kong a little bit less now, but it is especially afraid of a Hong Kong that will be too outspoken, too much willing to push the envelope, and perhaps even encourage other Chinese in the Chinese mainland to want the same advantages that Hong Kong has.
Do you believe that there's any hope for democracy to flourish in Hong Kong, or do you expect it will continue to deteriorate? In other words, what options do the people of Hong Kong really have?
Well, I think what Hong Kong still has is important. They have a considerable measure of freedom of the press, absolutely critical. Hong Kong newspapers regularly criticize China and the Chinese leadership. They have freedom of religion, freedom of gathering, and they can speak their minds. None of those things can happen on the Chinese mainland. So that still matters. However, what the activists, a lot of the people want, is a thorough democracy, the right to elect their own leadership. They have a bit of that, but not that much. And I don't think that they get much more.
What about the extradition of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou? Now, if she is extradited to the United States, what do you expect China's response will be? And why is she still here after all this time?
Well, I think that the wheels of Canadian justice grind very finely but very slowly. I worked when I was in government on an extradition request for a major criminal out of Vancouver, someone we wanted to send back to China. It took us 11 years. He had good lawyers and made appeals right to the Supreme Court. Now, I hope that this case does not last as long, but we know now already that it will not be wrapped up before the fall, and that doesn't even take into account the appeals process. The justice supervising the extradition hearing has yet to render a verdict. When that's done, the appeals process opens. Now, if the judge says no case, then Madame Meng will go back to China directly, and that will be over. And I presume the two Michaels might be freed shortly thereafter. But if she is consigned for extradition in the United States, she can have appeal process which can go up to the Supreme Court, could take a couple of years at least.
Now, still with the topic of Huawei, should Canada think twice before allowing them to participate in building our 5G network?
I think we certainly should think twice. But it's not necessarily quite an easy matter as it might look at first glance. We pay some of the highest data rates in the world, and we've got a set of companies that have equipment that's good quality, etc. Huawei's got good quality equipment that's much cheaper. So it's a real dilemma for the providers. What we do need is a decision fairly soon, because if we're not going to be one of the last countries to get 5G, they need to get started. The alternatives are Siemens, which is an Alcatel. These are options, but that takes time. Their equipment's more expensive. They need to get started. So I think a decision is overdue. If it is to include Huawei, that is the decision, if it is to include Huawei, we better be very careful to make sure that there's lots of security safeguards built into the system before we go forward.
Now, 2 Canadians are still being detained in China, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. Many believe this is in reaction to the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive. If it is, why does China believe this will really work?
Well, I think there's no doubt in my mind. The timing of the arrest of these 2 individuals is such that there can be no doubt that this is a retaliatory measure taken by China. They can do things there that we can't do here. We can't simply arrest a random Chinese national because one of our Canadians have been arrested in China. We just don't work that way. Their system allows that sort of flexibility, if you wish, where they can take what we would consider extrajudicial measures to detain someone in retaliation for something else that's being done. I'm not optimistic at all that the 2 Michaels will be freed unless the Madame Meng case has been dealt with. And China will stick to its guns, in my view, will not waver. The conditions may improve. I'd like to see that immediately. She's not even under house arrest. During daylight hours, she can roam the city. She has 2 mansions. She can go shopping, meet with friends. I mean, COVID-19 make a bit of an exception, I suppose. She can live a more or less normal life, a leisure in Vancouver. Our guys are locked up in a Chinese jail. And I've been in Chinese jails, not as a prisoner, but as a consular officer visiting Canadians who've been detained. And this is no picnic. It's hard time.
Yeah, well, how would you actually compare a Chinese jail to a North American jail? What are the big differences?
I'd rather be in a Canadian jail for sure. One of the things that's also characterizes Chinese jail is they make a great effort of mental pressure on you to confess and to reform. And so there's a lot of coercion that goes into that. Plus, our guys went through good 6 months of interrogation by the Ministry of State Security. That's a particular branch that focuses on the equivalent of the FBI, I suppose you could say, or CSIS. And they were in confinement, the lights on 24/7, never alone in solitary confinement, but always with a guard sitting just outside the bars of the cell watching them. Now they're out of that now. Interrogation phase is finished, but this is tough time. You'd have to look at our maximum security jails to find something equivalent. And I think that the food stuffs and the entertainment, none of that we may have to some degree in our jails would be found there. It's just tougher.
Now, the trade wars continue between Canada and China. China's been blocking exports of our canola and other goods for a while. It was the beef and the pork. How can a country like Canada respond in such a way that it'll actually make a difference?
Very difficult. We're 37 million people, they're 1.4 billion. We have an economy that is large, a couple trillion. They've got one which is perhaps 18 trillion, depends how you count it, closing rather steadily on the United States to be the world's largest economy. And we matter somewhat to them, but they can live without us much more easily than we can live without them as a market. We are more dependent on their market opportunities, even though they sell more here than we sell to them. Canada is a relatively minor consideration in their calculations, in my opinion.
So, Professor Holden, do we know on average how Canadians actually view China right now?
We track that fairly carefully, and my institute, China Institute at the University of Alberta, has in the past tracked quite carefully the views of Albertans as well towards China. And on both those groups, Canadians in general, Albertans, there's been a deterioration. That began before the two Michaels and before COVID-19, neither of which improved standing. And in fact, after the detention of the two Michaels and the Chinese economic retaliation, views became already negative, but they came more so. And COVID-19 has not helped either. I haven't seen the most recent polling, but it's not pretty seen from a Chinese perspective. So it has gone down. It can't go down all that much further, quite frankly. When you have a bad rating, you can only go so much lower. And so at some point, it would begin to rise normally, but right now, it is in the doldrums, to be sure.
Do you think that China actually cares how Canada and the rest of the Western world actually view their country?
I think they do. That doesn't mean that they will then do or become what we wish they would do or we wish they were like. They do care a lot about the United States. The United States is their big rival. It's a major economic power. They care about Europe, the EU as a group, and they care about the assembly of third world nations. And we are a country, they also care about public views here. I speak to the embassy regularly. They're unhappy about the coverage they get, etc. But they don't care enough that they're going to take measures which they don't believe are in their interests.
Now, China is going to be a big election issue in the U.S. presidential race between Trump and Biden. How much of an issue do you think it'll be in the next Canadian federal election?
Very hard to know. I think that election's a fair ways off. And it's hard to know what will be the driving issues in that election. In general, as you know, well, elections in Canada very seldom turn on a foreign policy issue. I think Diefenbaker was one exception, and certainly the free trade agreement, the NAFTA agreement, was an election issue. But in general, turns on economic issues, things that are closer to home. But to the degree to which there is a foreign policy issue, China will matter. The views of the government will be examined closely by the opposition, and there'll be a range of views. But I think you'll find it might not quite be as important as people think, because most are critical. And it'll be the opposition parties perhaps saying the government is too gentle on China, the government saying no, they're not, etc. It's too early to know if that'll really be an issue that bites, but the degree to which foreign policy plays, China absolutely.
U.S. President Donald Trump and others believe that China has far too much influence and control over the World Health Organization. What are your thoughts?
Well, they certainly have a great measure of influence. So does the United States, although the U.S. has now cut funding and is at odds with the WHO. Here I've got mixed views. The WHO, particularly for a smaller country like Canada, we really need their expertise and their intelligence. And by that I mean their surveillance system they run internationally, whereby viruses and diseases that are picked up in any one of the world's countries are reported to Geneva and then distributed to member countries. So maybe the U.S. could get along with the WHO. I think we'd have greater difficulty, but certainly WHO ought not to be concerned about offending China or offending the U.S. or offending Canada for that matter. I like it when these international organizations are not afraid to speak their mind and to be open and transparent, but we need them.
Many people believe that the coronavirus originated at a lab in Wuhan, China, and now, ironically, Canada is getting some of the personal protective equipment, or PPE, and other medical supplies from China. I don't know about you, but there is some irony there, isn't there?
There's a lot of irony there. I think it's unsettled yet precisely where the virus originated. I'm confident it wasn't a bioweapon or something done deliberately. Where it came from in southern China remains to be seen. I was in Beijing during SARS, working at the embassy and responsible for our response. Beijing and Hong Kong, Taipei and Toronto, those are the 4 cities that were most hard hit. But the disease we know originated in Guangzhou and Guangdong province in southern China. And I think it's too early to know. What would help would be an independent international body, including Canadians, perhaps with WHO involved, but with highly credible scientists from the world, including the United States, including Canada and others, expertise being the reason to be included, to get down there with full access and to dig around doctor to doctor, expert to expert, not to party officials, and find out the answer. I think we will know the answer eventually. It's very hard to hide these things for too long. I think it'll turn out to have been accidental. China got a lot of damage as well, not just the reputation to their economy, shrank in the first quarter of this year for the first time since the 1970s. So I think we need answers. I wish I knew with precision. I think we will get that answer, even if it takes a while.
Professor Gordon Holden, Director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
Thank you very much, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.